following video is part one of a three-part interview I conducted with my mother, Betty F. Taylor. I sat down with Betty in October of 2008 and then again in April 2011 to record her memories of her life. From her birth in 1921 in Gary, Indiana, growing up in Indiana, marrying Walt Taylor, my father, in 1942, moving to the frontier in Oregon in the early 1940s during World War II, back to the Midwest, and then moving back to the West Coast for good in the 1950s. Betty passed away in November of 2016. Please join me in hearing Betty recount her life in her own words.
Well, I'm Betty Finch Taylor, and I was born in Indiana, in Gary, Indiana, and February 24th, 1921.
What is the earliest memory that you have?
Oh dear, I don't know. I guess it was living in that house down there on the east side of Gary, the old steel mill company house. And my grandmother lived with us, and she used to go out. She'd take her chair out her stool out in the front sidewalk and give me a comb and let me pretend like I was combing her hair. And then her glasses would get sort of steamy, and so she'd clean her glasses on her petticoat. And I don't know, that's living in that house. I think I must have been only 3 or 4.
How you think 3 or 4? So that would have been like 1924, 25, something like that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And how old were you when Nancy was born?
I was 6. I'm 5.5 years older than she is.
Uh-huh.
Yes, again, my grandmother was living with us, and yes, we were living in Glen Park by then. And I don't remember too much about her being a baby there, but yeah, Mother Sarah would take me out for walks in along the streets in front of the house. Had been paved during the Depression, just before the Depression, to build new houses, but they'd never been built. So here were these roads all over there, but there were a lot of wildflowers blooming in and around where they were going to build houses. And I would pick the wildflowers. Mother always said the columbine I picked to bring home to her gave her hay fever.
How old was Mother Sarah at that time, do you think?
Well, let's see. My mother was about almost 30, probably, or 28, something like that. So her mother must have been in her 50s.
And where was her husband?
She'd been divorced by her husband, my mother's father. When Mother was still at home, I guess. He was kind of a partying man, I guess. He drank some, and
did you see him much?
I only saw him once, and that was when he came to visit us when we lived in Gary. And I must have been 10 or 11 then. And my mother saw a bottle in his suitcase, and she kicked him out right then. And
so neither Grandma Finch or Grandpa drank?
Well, Mother didn't, I'm sure, but and the only time I ever remember my father drinking was when on Christmas and on the holidays when we went on these potlucks to our friends' places, the men would go into the kitchen and have a drink.
And smoke cigars?
I don't know, it was before dinner. They probably didn't smoke cigars then, but oh yeah, he smoked cigars. And I imagine I'm sure he had something to drink too when he was out with
So what's the earliest thing you remember about school?
school.
You must have gone to school at kindergarten or first grade, or?
Yeah, I do. I remember I went to Glen Park School. It's an old school in Gary, in Glen Park there. Really old. Had a clock tower and an old brick building. I think it's a historical monument now. But I remember in kindergarten, I must have talked when I wasn't supposed to, or made some. And so the punishment for talking out of turn was to take that brown wrapping paper that they had plenty of and make a banner and put it around your face and hook it in the back. And you had to sit for an hour or so with this brown paper on and I was mortified. I was just mortified. So that was in kindergarten.
So you were an unruly child at an early age.
And I went to that school till I was in 6th grade. But when we were learning to read, I was a slow reader. I got a bad start in reading there, right off the bat. My mother even had to come to school, and they gave her we had these green books, and on Friday we got these green test books, and you read a paragraph, and then there were 10 questions you had to answer about the paragraph. And I don't know, you had 3 minutes to do it or something like that. I could never get the paragraph read. I didn't have time to answer the questions. So the teacher gave Mother a book to take home and let me practice. But that's one of my bad start in reading was one of the reasons I read so slowly, I guess. Well, I guess we had those what we called auditorium hours. You went into the auditorium, and the first half of the period was filled with music appreciation. And the teacher was the mother of that fellow that I was corresponding with on the internet here.
You met him in Classmates.com?
Yeah, and his mother was a teacher, Mrs. Black. And I was there. I was exposed. She played excerpts from Peer Gynt Suite and those kind of things, and I can remember listening to those. And I remember at the time someone named Madame Schumann Heink was a singer. I remember her playing the records from her. But she tried to expose us to some classical music. And then the second half of the period was performances on stage by different classes. And I always sort of enjoyed those. The acting and all that. I've never followed through on any of that. You just didn't go out to dinner in those days. The only place I remember ever going out to dinner with my family was at the YMCA cafeteria. And it was in downtown Gary. And after we went to church down there, before we changed churches, we would go there for dinner on Sunday at the cafeteria in the YMCA. Other than that, I honestly cannot ever remember going out to dinner with my family. Because in those days it was Depression years.
Mm-hmm.
And you just didn't go out to dinner. And we just didn't see very much of my father because he would go to work very early. I guess he would be there at breakfast time, but how much talking do you do at the breakfast table? And then he'd go to work and he wouldn't be home till 9 o'clock at night.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was no dinner table conversation. Just Nancy and Mother and me.
So between your parents, you had a much closer relationship with Grandma than you did with Grandpa.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Did he give you away at your wedding?
Oh yeah. And the one time I can remember him coming in, it was after I got out of. I don't know, maybe it was during high school. It must have been afterwards, after Prohibition at least. Anyway, he said he came into the bedroom one morning before I was even up, and I obviously had come in late from a date, and he said, "I just want you to remember, if you go out someplace and they're drinking," he says, "you can have a drink and maybe sip it, but just make it last a long time. You don't have to have more than one." And that's the only bit of advice I can ever remember him giving me.
The voice of experience.
Yeah. So, but we had family vacations. Because after her daddy started selling cars, well, he had a car to drive to work. We had a family car.
Mm-hmm.
It was a used car. We had a 34 Pontiac that I learned to drive on. But he would have a newer car as his car to drive to work, and we would get that car to take on a family vacation. And we traveled, well, I can remember standing in the middle of the Mississippi River in Minnesota, so that was a trip. We went up there in that area. And then we had a trip when we went to the top part of
Michigan.
Yeah, and we went up to the St. Lawrence River and took a boat ride through the Thousand Islands up there. And we went up to Canada, and we went to Ottawa and Montreal. And in those days, the thing to do was go to the Chamber of Commerce and rent a driver. And the driver would get in your car and drive you around to see point out all the points of interest. It was, I can remember those times. And then we also drove to New Orleans and in the South, and then we'd go down there to visit Mother's family in Mississippi. So we did travel around. Then we lived in that house where Nancy was born, about 3 or 4 years after that, and they decided that they needed to change and buy something. They wanted to buy this apartment building that had 3 apartments, and we could live in one and rent the other 2, and this would be a safe place for us to live during the Depression and the hard times, because Daddy was always on a commission only. He never had a
steady income.
Steady income. No, it was very difficult, I imagine, for Mother to manage spending habits. But anyway, they got this apartment building where I lived all the way through till I left home. And it had 3 apartments, and we lived in the middle one. And I remember various renters we had where you became quite close to them when there were just one couple. I remember we rented the upstairs apartment to. He was the Bear Band Hosiery Company came to town, and had a factory there, and he was the manager, and they came to live. Their name was Nearing. And the weekend that Joe Louis fought his first fight and won, this couple was up on the street where the theater was, and they got out of the theater and were walking down the street, and a car parade came through town, and she was shot just walking along the street by somebody in a car in this car parade, and she died.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that was a real strange happening. And then another couple, I remember, their name was Haycraft, and he was a pet milk salesman, and she was from the South someplace.
Mm-hmm.
And they had 4 children, I think. And Mother didn't want to rent that to them in a 5-bedroom apartment with 4 children. And he traveled. He was gone a lot of the time.
The apartments were 5 bedrooms?
No, 3. They were 5 bedroom. No, 5 rooms.
5 rooms. Oh.
5-room apartments. They were large. They were roomy. The 2 were. The lower apartment was just had 1 bedroom. But anyway, they rented the apartment upstairs. They finally talked Mother into letting him. And one month they just could not pay the rent. And so they gave us a big console radio they had. And it was bigger than any radio we had. So I remember that radio. And another couple that lived in the lower part, their name was Peterson. I remember Mother used to cut his hair for him. I remember when Roosevelt ran for president. He must have been older by then, a little older. But Mother swore up and down she was going to vote for Roosevelt. Well, after it was all over, that was because she was a Democrat. She felt from the South. She had to be a Democrat. And I remember when it was all over, and I asked her who she voted for, and she said, well, don't you tell anybody, but I did vote for Hoover. And Prohibition took place, I think.
Came and went?
Vaguely. Yeah, I can vaguely remember that happening. We always had the Chicago Tribune in the house in the morning. Not that I ever read it very much. My newspaper reading and all my reading started after I got married to Walt. I decided I had to read more to pay with all this money we were spending on reading material.
Mm-hmm.
So, but after I started going to high school, well, my social life picked up, as it does when you get in high school. Well, this was still, we didn't have all this outside entertainment going on that there's available now. And nobody smoked. Nobody drank. There were no drugs, and none of those things. We had a lot of parties. Most every weekend we'd have a party at somebody's house. And then people began to fix up their basements and put ping pong tables in.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, we even got a folding ping pong table to put up in our, like that one you had,
Mm-hmm.
to put up in the living room of the house. And we had that, when we first started high school, we were all taking band or orchestra. And we tried to we'd take our instruments and we tried, and we had one orchestration, the music. Stars Fell on Alabama. We never did very much of any sort of playing, but it was an excuse to get together. And we had a lot of parties at the church.
And what instrument did you play? Clarinet?
Clarinet, yeah. And we had a lot of activities in the basement of the church, and although there were a lot of Catholic kids who lived around, they were included in the whole thing, and they would come over. They would come to the church. It was right across the street from most of them. And when we got to high school, there was no Catholic high school in the area, so we had a whole new group of friends that we got involved with,
Mm-hmm.
the Catholic kids. And we always had, every month we had a dance at school, and different clubs would sponsor the dance and put the decorations up and arrange for the band, and we'd get 5 and 6 piece bands for $35 a night. And it was you'd get your program for the dance weeks ahead and fill your program out for the dance and have the first and last dance usually with the boy you came with. And I never went with anybody steady, but we just sort of all mixed up.
So at that time, rather than children being divided by ethnicity, there was more you were the Catholic kids or the Jewish kids or
there were
the
I can't
Italian
remember
kids.
the Jewish kids. Well, actually, we had a lot of foreign kids with long names, although that was the only thing that distinguished them, really, was they had different names than easy to pronounce names.
Like Smith or Jones, huh?
Because when Gary was started, they brought a lot of immigrants from Europe there to work in the mill. And there were, they devised a school system around the mill workers, and we all went to school 8 hours a day. The periods were divided into 55-minute periods, and there was, in high school, in grade school, there was always a gym period in the morning and one in the afternoon. There was no such thing as recess. And everybody took it. And when you got into high school, I think gym was required the first 2 years of high school. And but as far as division of, there were cliques, but not on any anything. The cliques formed, but I don't know that they were on any kind of division with one or the other.
Well, it's just that you were identifying the Catholic kids so specifically.
Yeah, but they were included in everything.
But how did you? I don't know who's Catholic or who's not these days.
I know these days you don't.
And then it was pretty important to know what religion everybody was.
Well, no, it really wasn't, except that there were an awful lot of us went to the Presbyterian Church. And then there were these other kids who had been to the Catholic Church, but they joined the school after we got to high school, because we all went to the same high school then. And it was just there wasn't a real feel for it. There was never any problems.
Mm-hmm.
And we always had the flag raised in the morning, and the bugle blew, and everybody stood at attention in all the classrooms. And then in the afternoon, when the flag was lowered, the same thing, the bugle.
And everybody stood at attention, and the flag was lowered, and that was the end of the day, and you went home?
And that was the end of the day at 4:15.
And what time did school start in the morning?
8:15.
So you went 4:15, 8:15 with a
8-hour day.
A 55-minute lunch period?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so you went down to McDonald's and got your lunch?
Oh, no. There was no such thing as that. There was one, I think it was a drugstore, but it had a soda fountain.
Yeah.
Down about 4 blocks from school. And that was the closest place that you could purchase any food that I know of. We went down there on Coke to buy Cokes.
Mm-hmm.
But we had a cafeteria, or you brought your lunch, or you could go home if you lived close enough.
And what would you do for lunch typically?
Well, I like to go home for lunch, and oftentimes I would walk home, and then Mother would bring me back. If I hurried, I could walk both ways, but it was a mile home.
Mm-hmm. So it'd take you, what, 15 minutes to walk home.
Walk home and yeah.
15 minutes to walk back.
Yeah.
And then you had, what, 25 minutes to eat, huh?
Yeah.
And so Grandma knew you were coming, so she'd have lunch ready, and
right,
you'd
right. Uh-huh.
jump in and have your what would you have for lunch in those days?
Oh, I don't remember what I had for lunch, but I like to go home for lunch. But I would eat at the cafeteria, or sometimes I'd take a lunch too.
Mm-hmm.
But you never went any other place for lunch because nobody had cars.
Yeah.
When I got to be a senior in high school, sometimes Mother would let me take her car back. And I would park out on the street, and there might be 3 cars there. But nobody had cars. We had the streetcar ran right along in front of the school. And I could ride the streetcar to school.
And this was Lew Wallace High School?
Yeah, and it was, you could get 5 coupons for a quarter.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, you could take 1 for each way.
So then you graduated from high school in, what, 1939?
Correct.
And you took 2 years off before you went to Purdue?
Well, yeah, I got a job working for J.C. Penney's. I was the layaway girl. And in the old penny stores, they had a balcony. And the layaway department was up there, so I was kind of up in the office area. And it was there that I met the boyfriend that I developed and had for quite a couple of years. In fact, that was why I got fired at the end of a period, because he didn't want somebody dating somebody else in the store.
He didn't. Who didn't?
The manager did.
Uh-huh.
The manager was Mr. Bolke. Anyway, and the boy I was dating, his name was Bob Sherwood. And I dated him pretty steadily for 2 years there before I at Walt.
Mm-hmm. Well, then you worked there, and then you got fired. And
I worked there, and then I got fired. So I applied for unemployment compensation. It was in its infancy at that point.
How long did you work at Penny's?
Oh, I don't know, probably about a year and a half.
Oh, okay.
And so I think I got $8 a week.
Mm-hmm.
But I then went to, I could go on the streetcar out to Horace Mann High School, and there was an Indiana extension out there, and I took a couple of courses out there. And I had enough money in that. But in the meantime, I got another job for a pipe company, and I was transcribing stuff. Actually, they were all war related at that point. And then I went to a business school. I guess I went to the business school first before I got that other job. I went to a business school for about 6 months, and then I got a job in the mill. And I was working there for about 6 or 8 months, and this lady that my dad worked for at the Buick garage, she had a daughter a little younger than me, but she said, if you would like to go to school and you know where you want to go, if you have enough to get started and you think you can make it, go ahead. And if you get stuck, I'll help you.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did. And that's when I went to Purdue, that after I'd been out 2 years. That's when I went to Purdue, and then the Pearl Harbor happened that winter. So my 1 year was cut short, but I did have to ask her for money.
Mm-hmm.
And
how much money?
Because Daddy's job had terminated immediately selling cars.
Mm-hmm. So how much money did you have to ask her for?
I don't remember. Must have been a couple hundred, $200 or $300. I don't remember.
Did you pay her back?
I was paying her back, and then when I got married, Mother and Dad finished it, so so they finished that off. I just don't remember how much it was, but I know I was when I came back. Oh, gee, it's hard to put things in perspective.
Yeah. So Pearl Harbor happened in December, and so you finished the school year ending in March or April?
It ended early, like in early May. And I came back and got a job at Northern Indiana Public Service as a cashier. And that's where I was working when I met Walt. I come home from school that spring, and my roommate came with me, and she was from Albany, New York. She had come to Purdue because she wanted to go west to school. I have never heard from her or anything about her since then, but anyway, she came home with me, and we had, in those days you had the society page in papers, and once a week they'd feature, it was a big picture.
Yeah, I've seen it.
Yeah, you've seen a big picture. And,
it was like a 4-column picture or something,
yeah,
as I recall.
and they were featuring girls around lots of times. There were parties or things that were going on pertaining to the war. I mean, wives that were being left and what they were going to do and all that kind of thing. And, yeah, he took the picture home and to the university club where he was living, and the fellows dared him to call me for a date.
So he was smitten with you from
Well,
from
I went
that
up
picture?
to the paper. I walked up to the paper and ordered a picture, and he was working noon hour because he was low man on the totem pole. And I don't remember him. But then I went back a week later to get the picture that I'd ordered. And of course he saw me those 2 times.
Yeah.
So then he called and asked me for it, and I didn't accept the first couple of times he called.
How many times did he call?
Oh, I don't remember, several times. A couple of...
He was persistent then.
Yeah, and I remember one night I said, no, I have to wash my hair. I don't want to go out tonight. But finally, I was having my wisdom teeth out. All 4 of them. I had black and blue jaws and bad breath and everything. Finally, I accepted a date, and we went to a roadhouse called the Spa for dinner. And I've got a picture of that, of us standing there when we went back to visit one time with Nancy and Skip, and we went out there and had dinner and took a picture there. But we went out there to dinner on that first date, and that was in June probably.
Of 42?
Yeah, no. Yeah, Pearl Harbor was 41.
Right.
Yeah, they've been 42. And then I didn't see him too much. We had a couple of dates. I didn't see him much all summer because I was working, and then he went to Michigan with Aunt May and all, and then I had a few more dates, and we went to Chicago to things, and
What was your first impression of him?
he was full of fillers.
You mean like odd facts?
Like those little things they used to fill the column out with, Yes, he is full of fillers.
What was your impression when you...
I didn't even notice that he had only 1 ear.
You didn't notice that he didn't have
No.
a missing ear?
Until, in fact, I didn't know it for a while until he told me. And then I looked at him more closely. And come Halloween, and that company I was working for, the Northern Indiana Public Service, was going to have a dance. And I almost invited another boy because he was such a good dancer and Walt was not much of a dancer. Well, no, I better ask him because he's taken me some nice places. And so then and then we were married in December.
Mm-hmm.
He got reclassified.
Because he was originally classified 4F or whatever.
Yeah.
Because of his ear.
Right. And then there was that very small period in there, 2 weeks maybe, when they were so hard up for men that they were taking limited service.
Mm-hmm.
And he took all these limited service guys in. They told him, he went to Chicago, he was in a Chicago draft board, and they said, well now, on Saturday, oftentimes we have not met our quota. And so if you come back on Saturday and we haven't met our quota, we'll take you. And of course everybody wanted to be in, because everybody was going. And he went back on Saturday and they said, you're in. So then that was just before Thanksgiving. So then I
42.
met him for lunch at Walgreens drugstore.
In Gary?
In Gary.
Yeah.
And I said, well, he told me he'd just gotten reclassified. And I said, well, what do you think we should do? Well, he says, I think we should get married.
What were you thinking, or what did you mean when you said, what do you think we should do? I mean,
well, I don't know. I guess we were he was getting serious.
he was getting serious.
Well,
you
right.
weren't.
When he told me that his ear was not hereditary.
Yeah.
I knew he was getting serious.
No.
And I guess we had some conversations about
The future.
the future, the war. The war had made a lot of people think about getting married before. It was either get married before or wait and get married
After.
till later.
So after he just proposed to you across the dining
across
table.
the table in the
Walgreens?
Walgreens drugstore. He kept saying the people behind me had their ears out and they were listening.
And did you say yes right on the spot? Or did you say to think about it?
I must have said I could think about it. I must have said that.
I mean, were you like walking on air? Were you know?
I don't remember.
You don't remember?
I honestly don't remember.
Uh-huh.
I do remember when we went to practice the night before at the church, and I stepped inside the church and I started to cry. And I cried the whole evening. I went home and I cried and cried, and mother and dad, I remember sitting on the end of their bed and talking to them. Well, do you think you're making a mistake? But I just couldn't even think about it without crying.
Do you remember telling your parents that you were going to get married?
Well, yeah. Well, I don't know. I guess so.
Did they say, "Gee, you hardly know the guy"?
I don't remember any
Yeah.
of that. Things move so quickly.
Yeah.
On Thanksgiving, I invited several of my friends to come over Thanksgiving night.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, now somebody's in this room is going to be married.
Okay.